The glass shattered before anyone could stop it. Not from the floor, not from a clumsy waiter. It shattered because Aday's Hall's hand had been shaking for the last 40 minutes, and somewhere between the third toast and the fourth glass of champagne, her fingers simply gave up pretending everything was fine. Nobody noticed. That was the part that stung the most. Around her, 300 people laughed and clinked and swayed to the live quartet, playing soft Korean ballads fused with Afro beats, a cultural nod to the union being celebrated that night. The venue was Celestine Grand, Chicago's most exclusive private events hall, draped in white orchids and gold silk runners. Chandeliers poured warm amber light over the crowd like honey. Somewhere near the entrance, a chocolate fountain stood 6 feet tall beside a tower of macarons shipped overnight from Seoul. It was the kind of party that made people feel small just by walking into it. Daisy had felt small since the moment her name was called. She was 31, a paralegal at a mid-size firm in the Loop. She wore a burgundy wrap dress she had ironed twice that morning and simple pearl earrings her late mentor had left her in a small wooden box. She was not loud. She was not flashy. She stood near the far end of the reception hall, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching her sister Yewande glide across the room like a woman who had never once doubted her own reflection. Yewande Hall was 27. 4 years younger, and somehow, in the eyes of their mother Ngozi, 4 decades more accomplished. That was the way it had always been. But tonight was different. Tonight, in front of 300 people, including several members of what Chicago's underground circles quietly referred to as the Jong Network, the most feared Korean organized crime syndicate on the North Shore. Yewande had taken the microphone during her own engagement toast and looked directly at her older sister and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "I want to take a moment," Yewande had said, her voice velvet and practiced, "to acknowledge everyone who helped shape me into the woman Hyunjun is choosing to spend his life with." She'd paused for effect, scanning the room slowly. "And I also want to acknowledge those whose example showed me exactly what not to be." Laughter rippled through the crowd, some nervous, most genuine. "My sister Daisy," Yewande continued, her tone shifting into something theatrical, almost tender, "has always been private, quiet, reserved." She tilted her head. "Some people call that wisdom. Our mother calls it something else." Another pause. "But I'll be kind tonight and just say, your character, Adais, is the reason your seat at this table has always been solo." The laughter that followed was loud. Adais didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She lifted her glass of sparkling water slowly to her lips and took a measured sip, and in the 2 seconds it took her to do that, she made a decision so quiet and so complete that no one in that room, not Yewande, not their mother Ngozi, not Hyunjun Jong himself, had any idea it had just been made. She decided to let them keep underestimating her. For now. What nobody in that hall knew, what nobody in her family had bothered to ask about in 3 years, was that Adais Hall, the quiet paralegal in the burgundy dress, was the sole owner of a property portfolio quietly valued at over $1.4 million. But we'll get to that. Because before the champagne dried on the tablecloths that night, something else happened. Something that would pull Adais into a situation far more dangerous than family embarrassment. Something that would test everything Josephine Carter had ever taught her about patience, strategy, and the kind of silence that builds empires. She heard a conversation she was never supposed to hear, and that conversation would change every single life in that room. Before we dive deeper into this story, we want to hear from you. Drop in the comments right now and tell us where you're watching from. Adiz had stepped away from the main hall to find a quieter corner, the way she always did at events that asked too much of her social energy. She'd found a narrow corridor behind the catering station, half lit, lined with stacked extra chairs and folded linen. It was the kind of place only staff used. She'd pressed her back against the cool wall, closed her eyes for 3 seconds, and breathed. That was when she heard the voices. 2 men. Low, urgent. The kind of urgency that wasn't about the party. She recognized the first voice immediately. Kwame Asante. Her sister's fiancé's closest friend and so-called financial advisor. A man who wore bespoke suits and laughed too loudly and had, in Adizi's professional assessment as a paralegal, the restless eyes of someone perpetually calculating exits. The second voice she didn't recognize at first. Slightly accented. Calm in the way that dangerous things are calm. The transfers need to happen before the end of Q1, the second voice said. Jung Sr. has already approved the structure. The old woman's name goes on the deed. We move the liquidity through her account, and by the time anyone looks, the paper trail points to her. Adeze went completely still. Ngozi? Kwame's voice, barely a whisper. She signs. She doesn't ask. You said she trusts you. She does. She thinks it's an investment opportunity I found for her. A pause. Then there's no problem. Adezi's fingers curled slowly around her phone inside her clutch. She did not move. She did not breathe louder than the corridor allowed. Everything Josephine Carter had ever drilled into her, every late-night lesson delivered over chamomile tea in a Lincoln Park townhouse, came flooding back in a single, crystalline moment of clarity. When you hear something dangerous, Josephine used to say, her papery fingers wrapped around a legal brief, your first instinct will be to react. Don't. Your second instinct will be to run. Don't do that either. Your job, your only job in that moment, is to remember everything. So Adiza remembered everything, the exact phrasing. The old woman's name goes on the deed, of the timeline. End of Q1, the authorization. Jung Sr. has already approved the structure. And the most terrifying part, the casual, practiced ease with which 2 men at an engagement party were discussing framing her mother for financial fraud. She waited until their footsteps faded before she exhaled. Then she opened her phone's voice memo app and pressed record. She couldn't capture what had already been said, but she was going to stay in that corridor for as long as it took. Because instinct, sharp, professional instinct, told her they weren't finished. She was right. 4 minutes later, the footsteps returned. Different pace this time. A third person had joined. Yeonjun wants confirmation before midnight, the unknown voice said. He doesn't like loose variables. It's handled, Kwame said. The sister? A brief silence. Which one? The quiet one. Paralegal. Another pause, longer this time. The hairs on Adai's arms stood up. She's irrelevant, Kwame said finally. She doesn't know anything. Never has. Low laughter. Then footsteps moving away. Adai's stayed in that corridor for 6 more minutes. Long enough to be sure. long enough to feel the full weight of what had just landed in her hands like a stone dropped from a great height. Then she straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, slid her phone back into her clutch, and walked back into the engagement party of the year. She smiled at a cousin. She accepted a canapé from a passing tray. She found a seat at her assigned table, the one furthest from the main dais, next to an elderly uncle who fell asleep before the entree arrived. And she sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and began to plan. Yewande caught her eye across the room and gave her a look that was half triumph, half boredom. The look of a woman who had already forgotten she'd humiliated someone that evening, because the humiliation hadn't required much effort. Adaze held her sister's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away first, not because she was backing down, because she was calculating. To understand what Adaze did next and why it worked, you have to understand where she came from. She grew up in Bronzeville, on the south side of Chicago, in a narrow brick row house that smelled of egusi soup and mentholated ointment and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from working 2 jobs while raising 2 daughters alone. Their mother, Ngozi, had immigrated from Enugu in her early 20s, married a man named Charles Hall, who was charming and unreliable in equal measure, and spent the next 2 decades building a life out of stubbornness and sheer refusal to accept defeat. Charles left when the girls were young. Yewande was 3, Adaze was 7, old enough to understand what absence meant, young enough to still hope he'd come back every time a car slowed outside the house. He never did. Ngozi poured everything that remained of her love into Yewande. Not out of cruelty. Adaze understood that now, even if she hadn't at 12. It was out of grief. Yewande looked like Charles. She had his wide smile and easy laugh and the effortless magnetism that makes certain people beloved without any particular reason. Loving Yewande was how Ngozi kept loving the man who had broken her. Adaze looked like herself, reserved, watchful. The kind of child who listened more than she spoke and who noticed things adults assumed children missed. She noticed everything. She noticed when the electricity was cut off and Ngozi cooked by candlelight and pretended it was an adventure. She noticed the stack of bills Ngozi hid between the mattress and the box spring. She noticed the way her mother's shoulders dropped by 3 inches whenever she thought no one was watching. At 16, Adaze started working weekends at a dry cleaner 2 blocks away. At 17, she opened a savings account. At 19, she earned a partial scholarship to study paralegal studies at a community college downtown, commuting by 2 trains because the bus took 40 minutes longer. She did not complain. She did not announce. She built. The woman who changed everything walked into her life when Adaze was 22, fresh out of certification and working as a file clerk at a downtown real estate law firm. Her name was Josephine Carter, 71, years old, retired property attorney, recently widowed, and in possession of the most precisely organized mind Adaze had ever encountered. Josephine had come in to file paperwork on a property she was donating to a community land trust. She'd waited 20 minutes at the front desk before anyone helped her. And the person who finally did was Adaze, who had noticed her waiting and taken it upon herself to assist, even though it wasn't strictly her job. "You're not supposed to be helping clients directly," the office manager told Adaze afterward. She'd been waiting 20 minutes, Adaze replied simply. Josephine had overheard both sides of that exchange through the frosted glass partition. She'd left her number on a post-it attached to Adaze's desk before she walked out. Call me. Jish Carter. Adaze called 3 days later, half expecting nothing. What she got instead was a Tuesday evening invitation to Josephine's townhouse in Lincoln Park. A 3-story brownstone, stuffed with legal texts, property records, and the kind of quiet dignity that came from a lifetime of building things properly. Josephine poured chamomile tea, set a legal brief on the coffee table, and began to talk. She talked for 4 hours. Not about herself, mostly. About property. About how it worked. About how most people spent their entire lives paying someone else's mortgage without ever realizing it. About how the same legal frameworks that had been used for generations to keep certain communities from accumulating wealth could, with the right knowledge, the right timing, and an almost supernatural patience, be navigated, worked, and leveraged. Do you know what the most underused power in this country is? Josephine asked at one point, setting down her tea. Adaze shook her head. Literacy, Josephine said. Not reading. Anyone can read. I mean, legal literacy, financial literacy. The ability to sit across from someone who has been told all his life that he is powerful and understand, document by document, that he is not nearly as powerful as he believes. She looked at Adaze steadily. You have that ability. I watched you handle that paperwork in 7 minutes that my previous attorney took 45 to explain. You just don't know yet that it's worth anything. That evening became every Tuesday evening for the next 4 years. Josephine taught her contract law, title searches, lien structures, leveraged acquisition, and the patience to wait for the right moment, the way a surgeon waits for the right incision point. She connected Adaze with a network of black women investors, property owners, and attorneys. Quiet, serious women who built wealth in the margins of a city that rarely noticed them. When Josephine died of a brief illness just before Adaze turned 29, she left her the Lincoln Park townhouse, a folder of contacts, and a handwritten note that read, "You already know everything I taught you. Now trust yourself to use it." Adaze sold the townhouse 6 months after the estate cleared probate. She used the proceeds, along with 3 years of aggressive savings, to form Ironwood Property Holdings, LLC, and acquired her first building, a 6-unit mixed-use property in Pilsen for $410,000. She told no one, not Ngozi, not Yawanda, not colleagues at the firm. Not a single person in her life knew that the quiet paralegal paying her own rent in a modest Bronzeville apartment was simultaneously the landlord of a building 3 miles away, bringing in $9,000 monthly after expenses. She had her reasons. Chief among them, she wasn't done yet. By the time Yawande's engagement to Hyunjun Jong was announced, a relationship that had moved from first meeting to formal proposal in 11 accelerated months. Adaze had acquired a second property in Bridgeport. 2 buildings, 14 units total, monthly revenue of $22,800. Portfolio value just past the 1.4 million mark. And still, nobody knew. Which meant that when Yawande stood at a microphone in Celestine Grand and told 300 people that her sister's character was the reason she was still alone, She was mocking a millionaire. She simply didn't know it yet. The morning after the engagement party, Adais woke at 5:45, as she always did, made a single cup of strong coffee, and sat at her kitchen table with a legal notepad and her phone. She played back the recording from the corridor. 3 minutes and 41 seconds of audio. Not perfect. There was ambient noise, the distant sound of the live band, muffled syllables at key moments. But the essential pieces were there. Enough in the hands of the right attorney to constitute probable cause. Enough in the hands of a federal prosecutor to open a serious inquiry. Adais listened to it twice, made notes. Then she put the phone face down on the table, folded her hands, and thought carefully. This was not a simple situation. Hyun-Jun Jong was not a simple man. The Jong network had operated in Chicago's Northwest corridors for nearly 2 decades. On paper, they ran a series of logistics companies, a chain of high-end Korean fusion restaurants, and a private security firm with contracts from several North Shore municipalities. In the circles that paid attention to such things, the Jong name was spoken carefully and never twice in a row. The patriarch, Jong Tae-yang, referred to simply as Jong Sr., had never once been formally charged with anything. Every case that had come close had collapsed before trial. Witnesses changed their minds. Evidence disappeared. Prosecutors got reassigned. Hyun-Jun was the eldest son, positioned for succession, young, educated, meticulously presented. He wore a different watch every evening, always understated, always worth more than most people's cars. He had looked at Yuan the way men like him look at beautiful, trusting things, with possession already settled in his eyes. Adaizi had noticed it the first time she met him at a family dinner 3 months prior. She hadn't said anything. It wasn't her place to say anything. It wasn't information, it was instinct. But now she had information, and the information said that Kwame Asante, Hyun-Jun's man, his fixer, the person managing his relationship with the Hall family, was planning to use Ngozi's name and identity to launder money, likely through a fraudulent property deed transfer that would make Ngozi appear to be the beneficial owner of assets whose real origin would not survive scrutiny. When the investigation eventually came, and it would come, because operations like this always attracted federal attention eventually, Ngozi Hall, retired seamstress from Bronzeville, would be the name on the documents. Not Kwame. Not Hyun-Jun. Not Jong Sr. Ngozi. Adaizi's mother. She set down her pen, looked at the ceiling, and for the first time since the night before, she felt something move through her chest that was not calm strategy. It was anger. The deep, cold, architectural kind that doesn't burn fast, it just builds. Then she picked up the pen again. If you're still watching up to this point, type "I'm still here" in the comment section right now. This story is just getting started, and we want to know who's with us till the end. She made 3 calls that morning. The first was to a former colleague now working as a compliance attorney at a firm that handled federal financial crime cases. Her name was Priya Mehta. Sharp, discreet, and one of the few people Adaiz had told about Ironwood. Mostly because Priya had helped structure the LC's operating agreement. Hypothetically, Adaizi said when Priya answered. If someone had audio of 2 individuals discussing the use of a third party's identity in a structured fund transfer, what would be the first recommended step? Priya was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, how hypothetical are we talking? Less than I'd like. Another pause. Send me the audio, encrypted. Tonight. Don't play it for anyone else, and don't mention the names to anyone until I've heard it. The second call was to a property records researcher named Dominic Owusu. A quiet, methodical Ghanaian-American man who worked freelance and whose ability to locate beneficial ownership structures buried beneath layers of shell companies was, in Adaize's considered opinion, genuinely miraculous. I need everything you can find on an LLC that would have been registered in the last 18 months connected to a Kwame Asante and potentially to a company in the Jung Group umbrella. Illinois registration first, then Delaware. Timeline? 48 hours if possible. It'll cost. It always does. The third call she almost didn't make. It was to her mother. Ngoke picked up on the second, a ring, already audible energy in her voice. The excited, slightly overwhelmed energy of a woman who had just hosted her daughter's engagement celebration and was still processing the magnitude of what it meant. Daisy, did you see how beautiful everything was? Yeonjun's family sent orchids from 3 different countries. 3. Your Auntie Chidinma said she's never seen a display like that outside Mama. Adaize kept her voice gentle. Has anyone spoken to you recently about a business opportunity? An investment? Someone asking you to put your name on a document? A brief silence. Why are you asking that? Adaize's grip on the phone tightened. Has someone? Kwame mentioned something. Ngozi said slowly, her earlier brightness dimming slightly. He said there was a property deal he'd found, a good return. He said he'd take care of all the paperwork. I just needed to sign one form as a beneficiary. He made it sound very simple. Mama, listen to me carefully. Do not sign anything. Not yet. Not until I've spoken to you in person. Can I come over on Sunday? Adaize, Kwame is practically family now. Sunday. I'll bring food. We'll talk. Another pause. Then, softer. Is something wrong? Everything, Adaize thought. I just want to make sure everything is done correctly, she said. You know how I am about documents. Ngozi made a sound that was half fond, half exasperated. The precise sound of a mother who has spent years gently mocking the daughter she least understood. Always so serious, always finding problems where there are none. You should try being happy sometimes, Adaize. I'm working on it, Mama. She hung up, sat with the silence for a moment, then opened her laptop and began to work. What followed over the next 6 weeks was the kind of slow, careful, unseen labor that Adaize had always been best at. Priya reviewed the audio and confirmed what Adaize had suspected. The conversation, combined with any documentary evidence of a fraudulent deed transfer, was potentially actionable at the federal level. The key was documentation. The audio alone was compelling. The audio with paper was airtight. Dominic came back in 31 hours, not 48, with a 17-page summary that made Adaize read it twice, just to be sure she'd understood correctly. Kwame Asante was listed as a managing member in 4 LLCs, all registered within the previous 14 months. 3 of them were dormant. The 4th, a company called Meridian Asset Partners LLC, had made 2 real estate acquisitions in the past year, both in Ngozi's zip code. both filed with transfer documents that contained an unusual beneficiary clause, allowing for post-closing name substitution. In plain language, the structure had been designed from the beginning to allow Kwame to swap in any name he chose as the apparent owner after the transaction was complete. They'd chosen Ngozi's name months before they'd even asked her to sign. The coldness of it made Adaze sit very still for a long moment. Then she forwarded Dominic's report to Priya with a single line. "This is everything you need." Priya's response came back in under 2 minutes. "I'm calling someone tomorrow. This is bigger than I thought. Don't engage with any of them. Don't let your mother sign. And Adaza, be careful. This isn't just financial fraud. These are people who handle problems quietly." Adaze read that last line twice. These are people who handle problems quietly. She thought about Josephine, about the folder of contacts, about the years of careful, unannounced preparation, about a Tuesday evening in Lincoln Park when a woman with sharp eyes had looked at a 22-year-old file clerk and seen something worth cultivating. She thought about the engagement party, the laughter, Yewande's microphone smile. Your character is the reason your seat at this table has always been so low. Adaze closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light. And for the second time since this all began, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what was happening. Not as a problem to be solved, not as a threat to be neutralized, but as a story. One she had been unknowingly preparing for her entire life. Then she went to sleep because she needed to be sharp in the morning. Sunday came with rain and the smell of jollof rice from 3 blocks away, which meant Ngozi had been cooking since 7. Adaz arrived at the Bronzeville row house with a container of chin-chin she'd made herself the night before, a deliberate choice, because it was her mother's favorite and because she needed the armor of normalcy for what she was about to say. Ngozi opened the door before she knocked, wearing a printed Ankara house coat and reading glasses pushed up into her braided hair. She looked the same as she always did, warm, slightly distracted, and in possession of the unconscious authority that certain West African mothers carry like a second skeleton. "You look tired," Ngozi said by way of greeting. "I'm fine, Mama." "You're not sleeping enough. You never sleep enough. Sit down. The rice is almost ready." They ate first. That was how it had to be. You didn't deliver serious news into an empty stomach in Ngozi's house. It was practically policy. Over lunch, Ngozi talked about the engagement, about Hyunjun's mother, Jung Soo-yeon, who had apparently spent the entire evening studying the decor with the careful attention of a woman cataloging what she'd paid for, about how Yewande had cried, happy tears, when Hyunjun's grandmother placed a jade bracelet on her wrist as a formal welcome. Adaze listened, ate her rice, asked the right questions, let her mother be happy for a little longer. Then she put down her fork. "Mama, I need you to listen to me now, and I need you to not dismiss what I'm telling you as me being serious or paranoid or a problem finder. I need you to actually hear me." Ngozi looked at her over the rim of her water glass. Something in her daughter's tone had shifted, and even in all her years of underestimating Adaze, she was not a woman who missed a genuine shift in tone. "I'm listening," she said quietly. Adaze told her, not everything, not the full legal architecture, not the federal investigation that Priya had quietly set in motion through a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office. But enough. the essential structure. That Kwame had built a financial vehicle designed to use Ngozi's name without her real understanding. That when regulators came looking, and they were already looking, the paper trail would point directly to her. That signing anything Kwame put in front of her could result in asset seizure, possible criminal exposure, and the kind of legal entanglement that Adax could not guarantee she'd be able to fully extract her from. Ngozi was silent through the entire explanation. When Adaize finished, the kitchen was very quiet except for the rain against the window. "Are you sure?" Ngozi asked finally. "I've had 2 professionals review the documents. Yes." Another silence. Then Ngozi set down her glass and said something that Adaize hadn't expected. "I wondered," she said softly. Something felt wrong. He was too comfortable, too smooth. Every time I asked a question about the document, he laughed like it was a small thing. She paused. "I don't like it when men laugh at my questions." "I know, Mama. I should have called you." "You can always call me." Ngozi looked at her daughter for a long moment, the kind of look that doesn't have an immediate translation, that carries inside it years of overcorrection and assumption, and the particular guilt of a mother who knows she didn't see clearly. "You've always been the serious one," Ngozi said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't quite not one either. "Yes," Adaize said simply. "Tell me what I need to do." By week 3, Priya's contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office had opened a quiet preliminary inquiry into Meridian Asset Partners. The inquiry was not yet public, which was precisely the point. At this stage, the goal was documentation, building a case file that could survive a defense attorney's best efforts to dismantle it. Adaize was not named anywhere in those early documents. That had been her specific instruction to Priya. She was to remain a source, not a witness, for as long as legally possible. She knew how the Jong network operated. She knew what happened to visible problems. Her power at this stage was exactly what it had always been. Invisibility. She went to work. She came home. She reviewed her property books. She visited her Pilsen building on a Thursday evening to check on a plumbing repair she'd commissioned, walking the hallways, greeting tenants by name, making notes on a clipboard like the landlord she quietly was. Her tenant in Unit 4. A young Congolese woman named Amara, who was finishing a nursing degree, stopped her in the corridor. "Miss Hall, I wanted to say thank you for fixing the window latch before I even had to ask twice, and for holding the rent through October when I had the hospital bills. I don't know if you know how much that mattered." Adaize looked at her for a moment. "I know exactly how much it mattered," she said. "Keep going with your degree. You're almost there." Amara smiled, went back inside. Adaize stood in the hallway for a moment, longer than necessary. She thought about Josephine. She thought about the post-it note on the desk. "Call me. J. Carter." She thought about how a single act of basic human decency, helping a woman who had been waiting 20 minutes, had altered the entire architecture of her life. Funny what small decisions build. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in a Streeterville penthouse, something was beginning to fracture. Yuande had started noticing things. Small things. First, the way Kwame's phone went face down every time Hyunjun walked into the room. The way certain guests at the engagement party had spoken in low Korean to each other while watching Hyunjun with expressions that weren't quite pride. The way Hyunjun himself, charming, attentive, generous to the point of performance, occasionally paused in the middle of conversations, his eyes going somewhere behind his own face, checking something internal that he never shared. She had said nothing to anyone, but she'd started keeping a small notebook. Yuan Hall, for all that she performed effortlessness, was not a stupid woman. She had gotten this far on instinct as much as on charm. And her instinct, for the past 3 weeks, had been sounding a low, persistent alarm. She hadn't called Adaz. She didn't know how. The call came on a Tuesday. Adaz was in the middle of reviewing a lease renewal contract at her kitchen table when her phone buzzed with Priya's name. They're moving faster than expected, Priya said without greeting. Kwame is trying to close the Meridian transfer this week. He's moved up the signing by 3 weeks. We think he knows something is in motion. Maybe not the federal piece, but he may have heard a rumor through the network. Adaz put down her pen. Can you stop the transfer? Not without tipping the investigation. If we flag the deed before the inquiry is formalized, we lose the element of surprise, and they'll restructure through a different vehicle. What do you need from me? We need your mother to delay, not refuse. That could alert Kwame. Just delay. She needs to tell him she's traveling, or that her attorney is reviewing the document, or anything that buys us 9 to 12 business days. She can do that. Adaiza. Priya paused. Are you sure she can do it without Kwame suspecting? Adaiza thought about her mother standing at the stove that Sunday. I don't like it when men laugh at my questions. She's tougher than people think, she said. That must run in the family. She called Ngozi immediately after. Walked her through exactly what to say to Kwame when he called. The tone, not suspicious, not resistant. Just the natural bureaucratic friction of a careful older woman who'd been advised by her accountant to have all documents reviewed before signing. Ngozi listened carefully, asked 2 precise questions, then said, I can do that. You're sure? Adaize, I raised you and your sister alone in that house on Calumet Avenue on a seamstress salary in a city that didn't care if we lived or died. I think I can manage a phone call. Adaize almost smiled. Yes, Mama. The same day, Ngozi delivered her delay to Kwame, flawlessly, according to the follow-up call Adaize received from Priya, who had been doing background monitoring. Something unexpected happened on the other side of the story. Yewande called. Not a text, an actual phone call. Which, between the 2 of them, hadn't happened in several months. Adaize stared at her sister's name on the screen for 1 full ring, then picked up. Hello. I need to talk to you. Yewande's voice was different from usual. The performance wasn't there. What was underneath it sounded younger, uncertain, and tired. Okay. Not on the phone? Can I come over? Adaize looked around her apartment, at the notepad with the property figures, at the closed laptop, at the careful, invisible life she'd constructed over years that no one in her family had ever thought to ask about. Come at 7, she said. Yewande arrived in jeans and a simple blouse, no jewelry except small gold studs, no makeup to speak of. She looked like a version of herself from 10 years ago, the version that hadn't yet learned to perform. She sat on Adayezi's couch with her knees pressed together and her notebook, the small one Adayezi hadn't known about, held with both hands in her lap. "I think something is very wrong," Yewande said. Adayezi sat down across from her. "Tell me." For the next 40 minutes, Yewande talked. She talked about the guests at the party who watched Hyunjun with those tracking eyes. She talked about a late-night call she'd overheard through the bedroom wall. Hyunjun speaking rapid Korean with someone she now recognized by voice as Jung Sr., the words sharp and pressured. She talked about finding a burner phone in the kitchen drawer while looking for a pen. She talked about a name she'd seen written twice in Hyunjun's briefcase, Meridian, without knowing what it meant. When she finished, she looked at her sister with the open, unguarded face of someone who doesn't know what comes next and has run out of places to hide from the question. "What is Meridian?" she asked. Adeze looked at her for a long moment. This was a crossroads. She could close the door here, tell Yewande nothing, protect the investigation, keep her role invisible for the 9 more days it needed to remain invisible. It was the strategically correct move. It was exactly what Josephine would have mapped out on a legal notepad in her precise, unhurried handwriting. But Yewande was sitting on her couch in a plain blouse without jewelry, and she looked exactly the way Adeze had felt standing in a corridor at an engagement party, holding too much alone. "I'm going to tell you something," Adeze said carefully. "And I need you to understand that what I say cannot leave this room, and that you cannot change how you behave around Kwame or Hyunjun for at least 10 more days. Can you do that?" Yewande's jaw tightened. "What has he done?" "Yewande, can you do that?" A beat. Then, "Yes." Adeze told her about the corridor, about the recording, about Meridian, about Ngozi's name on the deed. She watched her sister's face as the information landed, saw the exact sequence of disbelief, clarity, grief, and something that looked very much like self-recrimination move through it like weather. "Mama." Yewande's voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. "She didn't sign anything. She's safe. We're handling it." "We?" "I have people involved, attorneys. It's being managed properly." Yewande looked at her. "How long have you known?" 6 weeks. "And you didn't." She stopped, started again. "You could have told me." "I needed you to behave normally," Adeze said simply, "and I wasn't sure you could." The honesty of that landed visibly. Yewande didn't argue it. She absorbed it, the way you absorb a truth that has the texture of something you already knew. "I want to help," she said finally. "I know. What can I do? Right now? Go home. Act normal. Love him the way you've been loving him. Give me 10 days. Yewande stared at her sister for a long time. The gap between them, years of it, thick with favoritism and performance and the accumulated weight of a mother's uneven love, sat in the room quietly. "I'm sorry," Yewande said. "For the party. It was short and it was late, and it was probably not enough. But it was real." "I know," Adeze said. The federal inquiry went formal on a Wednesday morning. Adeze learned about it from Priya at 6:47 a.m. Sitting with her coffee before work, watching the early light come through her kitchen window and thinking that it was the kind of morning that felt like a held breath. The Southern District is filing a sealed complaint against Kwame Asante and 2 associates within the Jong network, Priya said. They're also naming Meridian Asset Partners in a related civil asset seizure action. Jung Sr. is a person of interest, but not a named defendant. Not yet. The goal at this stage is to work up the chain through Kwame. And my mother? Completely clear. Dominic's documentation showing the retroactive name substitution structure was exactly what they needed to establish that she was intended as a fraudulent nominee, not a willing participant. Her name won't appear in any charging documents. Adarze let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding for 6 weeks. What about Hyunjun? A pause. He's in a complicated position. He's been present in several discussions that are now on record, but the prosecutors will determine his exposure separately. His relationship with your sister? Priya paused carefully. That's not a legal question. No, Adarze agreed. It isn't. She called Yewande at 7. Yewande picked up on the first ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. It's happening this morning, Adarze said. Federal. Kwame is the primary target. Hyunjun is involved, but not yet charged. Mama is clear. Silence on the line. Yewande? I'm here. A long breath. I'm here. Are you okay? A pause that carried considerable weight. I don't know yet, Yewande said honestly. Ask me in a week. I'll ask you in a week. By midday, it was in the news. Not the full story. Federal complaints rarely arrived with clean narratives attached. But the name Meridian Asset Partners was in a Tribune financial crimes column by noon. And Kwame Asante's name was in a second report by 2 p.m., described as a financial consultant with ties to North Shore investment networks. The Jung name appeared in the 4th paragraph, prefaced by the phrase alleged connections. In Streeterville, Hyunjun Jung was on a call with his family's attorneys before the article finished loading. In Bronzeville, Ngozi Hall sat in her kitchen with her hands folded on the table and cried quietly. Not from fear, but from the particular relief of a narrow escape, and from the strange, complicated feeling of realizing that the daughter she had underestimated for 31 years had been standing between her and ruin for 6 weeks without saying a word. She called Adarze at 2:30. You protected me, Ngozi said. No preamble. You're my mother. I didn't. Make it easy. For you to be my daughter. I didn't. She stopped, started again. I didn't see you clearly, Adarze. For a long time, I'm sorry. It was the fullest apology Ngozi had ever given her. It was not everything. It didn't need to be. Come for dinner on Sunday, Adarze said. Both of you. I have something I want to tell you. That Sunday, with rain on the windows again, and jollof on the stove, this time in Adarze's kitchen, which was larger than they'd assumed, and in a building, they noticed, with a keypad entry system and freshly painted hallways. Adarze sat her mother and sister down and told them about Ironwood. All of it. The Pilsen building, the Bridgeport property, 14 units, $22,800 monthly, $1.4 million in portfolio value, 4 years of quiet, deliberate, unannounced building. She told them about Josephine Carter, the Post-it note, the Tuesday evenings, the chamomile tea and the legal briefs, and the woman who saw a file clerk waiting to become something and chose to say so. She showed them the portfolio summary on her laptop. Just the numbers, simple and clear. Ngozi and Yewande read it in silence. When Ngozi finally looked up, her eyes were wet. 4 years, she said softly. A little more. Why didn't you tell us? Adeze thought about how to answer that. The true answer was complex. It was about protection, about not wanting to be talked out of something before she'd proven it was real. About the years of having her judgment doubted and her choices smiled at and her silence interpreted as emptiness rather than intention. But the simplest version was this. I needed to build it first, she said. I needed to know it was solid before I showed anyone. Yewande was staring at the screen. She looked up slowly. You're a millionaire. I'm a property investor, Adeze said. There's a difference. At the party, Yewande stopped. Don't, Adeze said, not unkindly. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me. Then let it be the last time it matters. Let it close. Yewande nodded. Small, real. 3 months after the engagement party, Adeze launched Ironwood Rising, a 6-week real estate education program for Black women in Chicago between the ages of 22 and 45. Offered free of charge. Taught on Saturday mornings in the community room of her Pilsen building. The first cohort had 11 women. She walked into that room on the first Saturday morning with a legal brief and a thermos of chamomile tea. And she set them on the table, and she looked at 11 faces looking back at her. Some cautious, some skeptical, some carrying the particular tiredness of women who have been working very hard in the direction of somebody else's dream. And she said, you don't need to announce what you're building. You just need to build it correctly. She thought about Josephine. She thought about a kitchen table in a narrow brick house where the electricity had once been cut off. She thought about a corridor behind a catering station and a voice memo running on a phone tucked inside a clutch. She thought about a burgundy wrap dress and pearls and a glass of sparkling water held steady in a hand that didn't shake. She thought about every moment when the room had decided she wasn't the most interesting story in it. And she smiled. Because the thing about being the one nobody watches is that nobody sees you building. Ngozi sold her Bronzeville house 6 months later with Adeze's guidance at fair market value, through a clean title transfer that Priya's firm reviewed for free. She moved into a smaller, newer place in Hyde Park with a garden and a kitchen window that got morning light. Yewande ended her engagement to Hyunjun Jung 7 weeks after the federal complaint was filed. She did it quietly, without drama, in a short meeting in a hotel lobby that lasted less than 20 minutes. She was in therapy by the following month, her own decision, announced at Sunday dinner with the same simplicity that Adeze used to announce everything that mattered. I think I spent a lot of years performing for people who weren't watching as carefully as I thought they were, Yewande said one evening, over food and the slow process of 2 sisters finding the grammar of honest conversation, and ignoring the one person who was actually paying attention. Adeze passed her the chin-chin. You're paying attention now, she said. Kwame Asante pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud and conspiracy charges 14 months after the engagement party. The Jong network restructured significantly in the wake of the investigation. Jong Sr.'s name appeared in 2 civil asset recovery actions the following year. And in Pilsen, on Saturday mornings, in a clean community room with good light, the 3rd cohort of Ironwood Rising was learning to read a title search. Every brick laid in silence builds a life that cannot be ignored. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Adeze's patience, in Ngozi's second chance, in Yewande's awakening, then please like this video right now. Leave a comment and tell us, what would you have done in her place? And subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Every day, we bring you stories of quiet strength, long strategy, and the kind of wisdom that only reveals itself to those who stay until the end. You stayed. That means something. We'll see you in the next one. Asterisk.